Good morning. Morning. We're still in the book of Job. Should be in chapter 1 and 2. You know, there's 40 chapters in Job, and we're still in chapter 1. You may wonder if this is going to go beyond 50 weeks. It won't. It gives us a glimpse into an invisible world. One of my favorite verses is Hebrews 11, verse 3. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen is not made out of what was visible. What is seen, the visible world, this material world in which we dwell, comes from a world that is invisible. Does such an invisible world exist? Yancey says that the belief in the unseen world forms the crucial dividing line between faith and unbelief. If there is no unseen world, well, then all our hopes are gone, right? Now, we should not be afraid or ashamed of the fact that we believe in a world that one cannot see. The world wants to just push us back and say, well, you're just a bunch of superstitious fools to believe such a thing. I like to turn around and say to them, there's a different translation of this verse, and it says, by faith, you understand that the universe was not formed by any intelligent agency, so that what is seen was made out of what is seen. In other words, you believe that the universe made itself. And you claim that that is science. Well, that's nonsense. Matter of fact, the whole evolutionary schema of the world making itself by accident is now in turmoil, because as science advances and we gain more and more insights into molecular biology, we're finding out that it's a dead end. That doesn't work. That's a bad paradigm. And they're trying to figure out, how do we replace it? Well, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because we got to find something to replace it that keeps God out of the door. We don't want that camel's nose to get in the tent. Don't be afraid of the fact that there is an unseen world. Both beliefs are matters of faith. So when I talk to someone like that, I say, you have as great a religious faith as I do. In fact, more so. And it's not something to be ashamed of. Last week, we took a look at that. We took a peek at that world, that unseen world. And we found that it was a little bit more than the traditional view of clouds with little babies in white dresses, holding a harp and humming some, tune. Now, it's an exciting place. It's glorious. It's powerful, much more powerful than we are. Full of creatures who differ. They differ in appearance, at least the way they're presented in words. I mean, there's authority, there's a hierarchy. In fact, the higher you go in this hierarchy, the descriptions get crazier and crazier. And you wind up at the top talking about cherubs that have 4 heads or 4 faces, the face of a lion, a man, a calf, a bird. Really? And they exist in these wheels that are covered with eyes, and they have wings that have eyes in their armpits. And really? It's crazy. We find it something that's exciting, but it's also incomprehensible. And it's huge. And we learned about some of these creatures that are called Bene Elohim. They're a highly ranked heavenly being called the sons of God. And they have been given, apparently, authority. We get this in Psalm 82 and 89. In Deuteronomy 32, they've been given authority over nations and geographical sections of the earth. Paul alludes to this in chapter 17 of Acts when he's speaking to the Athenians. He said, God has divided up the world. He put it in control of the sons of God. That's interesting. We also talked about Satan. Satan is the highest ranked of these beings. He's called the anointed cherub, or the throne guard, the guardian cherub, the one that is closest to the throne of God. And in Mesopotamia, that there was such a thing called throne guards. Those are those closest to the king, big bad dudes, most powerful men, who have his confidence and are close to him. And Satan was once one of those. We see a picture of them in Revelation chapter 4, which talks about the throne of God. And they are in the immediate vicinity surrounding the throne of God. And Satan was one of those. It says in Ezekiel 28 that God says, I anointed you, I appointed you to be the guardian cherub. But when evil was found in you, you were driven in disgrace from the mount of God and expelled from your position among the fiery stones. Now, when the Bible speaks, especially in prophetic language, about a mountain, it's usually speaking about a realm of authority or a kingdom authority. The throne of God is seen as being up on a mountain. In ancient times, the ancients saw, well, gods must exist away from us. So they were up high in the mountains, okay? And so the mountain is referring to God's authority, his kingdom, his rule. And so he was ejected in disgrace. He was fired, as it were. And it says he lost his position among the fiery stones. The fiery stones, what are those? Well, you go back to Revelation 4. It says that around the throne of God are 7 torches or 7 fires, which represent the sevenfold Spirit of God. So the closest there was to God, when iniquity was found in him, he was fired. He was booted. As far as we know, he still has the kind of power that level creature does. But he has been thrown out. So where does he go? Well, first of all, he does have authority. Now, the sons of God, that the prince of Persia, the prince of Greece, Michael, the prince of Israel, these princes, as you will call them, they were given authority by God. Well, Jesus calls Satan the prince of this world. He does it 4 times. Paul calls him the prince of the power of the air. He has authority in the whole world, not just prince of Persia, prince of Greece. He has authority in the whole. How did he get that authority? How did Satan get authority? Did God give it to him? Oh, Alvin, you're not allowed to answer that.
When Adam sinned,
God?
It comes from God? Go ahead.
wasn't it when Adam sinned, he lost authority because God granted authority to Adam, but when he sinned, that dominion passed on to Satan.
Bingo! God gave the authority over the world to Adam. Adam gave it to Satan. And so he does have authority over the world. And the whole story of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is all about reclaiming it, about redemption, about God reversing what happened in that day. Now, it appears from Psalm 82, which is a very interesting psalm, that the sons of God, the Bene Elohim, these princes that rule over very parts of the earth, had been corrupted and gone over to Satan. So he now rules over them and in the nations of the earth. Okay? As a matter of fact, that whole psalm is really a rebuke from God to these forces. And this may be why in Ephesians 6:12, we talk about our struggle not being against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities, the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. So what appears to be the case as we look at all this is that these authorities and powers continue to have the ability to operate in the heavenly realms. They execute their authority and their dominion over earth. And the conflict between the righteous and the ungodly heavenly beings apparently is not carried out in heaven, at least not until the end of this age, but it's carried out on earth. Consequently, when Gabriel wants to go to see Daniel, who opposes him? The prince of Persia, right? And Gabriel isn't strong enough to make an incursion into that prince's territory until Michael, who is ranked higher, comes. Wow, this is wild stuff. So both the sons of God and Satan himself, they continue, though they're unrighteous, to have access to their place in heaven, to carry out their work on the earth. And all of them are present at this divine council, which is where we left it last week. There is a council where all of these angelic beings or these spiritual beings gather together to present themselves before God of heaven. And God addresses Satan. Job chapter 1, verse 8.
Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?
There's no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil.
Now, one thing I want you to see is that I'll put that off for a little bit here. It's astonishing to me that all of the heavenly host and the creator of heaven and earth, of all that there is, put their attention on one man. I mean, it just blows me away. And what this does is this raises up the status of humanity. I mean, the fact that we were created in God's image is enough to make us special. But beyond that, God is involved with us, and all of heaven can be influenced by the actions and the reactions of one man. That's amazing. Now, psychologists tell us that we all have need of two things. We have the need of security. We need to know that things will go well with us, that ultimately we will be taken care of. We need that, okay? And we also need what they call significance. We need to know that we matter. Isn't it important to you, men, that you matter to one woman? That's really important. They say that the one thing that a pretty girl can't stand is that she's ignored. She wants to know that she's pretty. She wants to know that she matters. And that goes all through human history. Now, do y'all remember Carl Sagan? Okay, you may have. He was the host of the PBS series, science series called Cosmos. It's really propaganda for scientism, but that was his thing. And he was an astronomer and a scientist. And back in 1990, the Voyager 1 was on its way out of the solar system. It was passing its last photographic objective, which was Saturn. Remember those great pictures we got of Saturn's rings? I mean, it was absolutely amazing. And then they were done. They were going to shut down the cameras, and they were continuing to monitor various signals. To this day, they are doing that. Okay. But he convinced them to turn the satellite around, point the camera back at Earth, and take a picture. Actually, took several images. And when he was making his case, he said something that's really interesting. He said, the picture would be meaningful, quote, as a perspective on humanity's place in the universe, unquote. Now, wait a minute. That's not a scientific statement, is it? No. That's a philosophical, a theological statement that he wanted to make. And later on in his book, he wrote a book of the same title, The Pale Blue Dot. There's a picture of that pale blue dot. This is some of the Milky Way, and there's the Earth. That's us, okay? And he called it the pale blue dot. He wrote a book, and in that he said, and I couldn't read the whole quote, but it ends up this way: every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Picture taken 3.8 million miles away from the Earth, 40 times the distance from the Earth to the sun out there. Isn't that amazing? He says, we've lived on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. What is his view of humanity's significance? What was that?
We don't matter.
We don't matter. There is no significance. We are an accident of chemicals that exist on a mote of dust in the midst of a middle-sized galaxy, in the midst of millions of other galaxies, and therefore we are insignificant. And I think there was some blowback to him for that. And so he later on began to say to us, well, since we have evolved along with all the universe and the same elements exist in our body that exist in the stars, we are made of stardust. Now, doesn't that make you feel good? We're made of dirt. That's really what he's saying. And this is the problem with those who do not see a division between the world we can see and the world we can't see. What makes us significant? By what criteria do you measure significance? Well, if we look at power and glory, our mortality, and we compare ourselves with the angels, and this realm we've been looking at, we don't really have a whole lot of significance. If we look at our size, compared with this universe that God has made, we don't look very big at all. We are truly insignificant. But if we look at God's regard for us, we get a different perspective, don't we? It all depends on your point of view. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, it talks about how God created the heavens and he put the lights in the heaven, the sun and the moon and the stars. He cast them out. He spread them out over 20 billion light years or whatever it is. And why did he do that? He did that to provide us with signs of his glory, to mark time and seasons and special holy days, essentially to mark off the boundaries of times and to provide light for whom? For the earth. Now that's different. If God creates this incredible universe and it's all these stars and all of Carl Sagan's wonders really were created for one purpose, to take care of the habitat for man, then we really are at the center of the universe. Leonard.
What was interesting is that in the 90s, there was a book written, God, the Evidence, by Patrick Lynn, and he went on what I call a Lee Strobel journey, because he was an unbelieving professor at George Mason University. And so he considered a variety of disciplines. Have any of you read that book, God, the Evidence? It's an incredible book. I would encourage you to read it. But one of the things he came to the conclusion, you said it depends on your point of view, and oftentimes our point of view is biased. Patrick Lynn tried to go out in an objective way and see what the universe told him. And he saw just the opposite of Carl Sagan. He absolutely saw, based on the evidence, that we were uniquely positioned and protected in the universe in such an incredible way that it couldn't have been by chance. It had to have been planned. And Patrick Lynn eventually came to the conclusion, and he became a believer.
Well, this is the man whose point of view was open to faith, wasn't it? Carl Sagan is a man whose point of view is not. It can be said that for the one who is open to faith, there is always enough evidence. To the one who will not believe, there will never be enough evidence. And that's really true. Now, Thornton Wilder made a quote. I think it's a real good one. In it, he says, "Some say that to the gods, we are like flies that boys idly swat on a summer day." Right? They don't matter. As a matter of fact, in Job here, when there's an angelic being that speaks, we'll talk about next week, his attitude toward human beings is they're just worms. They're just nobody. They're nothing. Others say that not a feather from a sparrow falls to the ground without the will of the Heavenly Father. What a difference in point of view, isn't it? Does God know when a sparrow falls? You know when a feather of a sparrow falls. Does he know the number of hairs on your head, which are always changing? Right? Yeah. Yeah, they're not getting more numerous, they're getting less. Yeah, I understand, especially us guys. So, yeah, but all that God knows. He knows not only that, he knows the thoughts of our minds. Not only that, he knows the thoughts of our minds now and the thoughts we will think tomorrow. I mean, the more you think about the greatness of God, you begin to understand the psalmists' wonder and the glorious language that they employ when they talk about God, and how that God says to us, he says, my thoughts are as high above your thoughts as the heavens are above the earth. We certainly do serve a great God. Now, one thing I want you to notice, who is the first one to speak in this conversation? God is. We have everybody comes together. The first thing God says, as far as we know, is, well, Satan, have you considered my servant Job? He's a good guy, upright, blameless. Here's God, shuns evil. Now, I want you to understand something. This was not Satan coming into the council and saying to God, I need your permission to go test that guy. He's my target. No, not at all. God picks a fight with Satan over Job's life. Even later on, in chapter 2, God makes the comment that Satan had incited him through this to ruin Job without cause. Without cause, he was ruined. Without cause, he was put into intolerable suffering. God is the one who made this choice. You might ask yourself the question, can God lead you deliberately into failure and suffering? And if you believe Job, he can. I wrestled with this question big time because I had a successful Navy career and I decided to leave the Navy at 20 years and I decided to step out in faith. I mean, I looked at it that way. I looked at it, I want to go into a small business. I'd gotten into manufacturing and I wanted to go into a small business. I wanted to do good things. I wanted to honor the Lord and enjoy his blessing. And, and I did. I mean, I never felt more in the will of God than I did then. And I spent 4.5 years working harder than I ever worked in my life. And we were gradually, slowly ground down to nothing. And I would scream at God and I would say, what are you doing? I am honoring you. I mean, we have meetings in the company and we give you glory. I'm trying to teach people. I'm trying to take care of family. I'm trying to do all the right things. And you are killing me here. And I came out of that, had to shut it all down. Big failure. And then we went through about 7, 8, 9 years of difficulties like that. And I learned something. I believe God can, in his will, move you into failure or into suffering. Because your life is more precious than your comfort. He needs us to be tried. And we'll talk about that a little bit here as to why. You know, Rabbi Kushner, you may have heard about his book. He wrote it back in 1981. It's called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Y'all know about that book? Yeah, he wrote that because he had a little son who had a degenerative disease who would never make it past his teenage years. They knew that. And he watched all those years his son descend into this disease and he died. And he wrote this book about a very poignant book about the experience and all the questions that he asked. Very interesting. His conclusion was that, yes, God sympathizes with us and he walks through our troubles with us, but he is powerless to prevent evil and bad things from happening. Isn't that interesting? Well, Job tells us really a different story. Whereas Rabbi Kushner says God can't prevent bad things from happening to good people. In this particular case, God himself sets up the worst things to happen to the best of people. It's a different way of looking at God. So we have a challenge. And Satan gives him that challenge in Job 1, 9-12.
Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well, then. Everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
Wow. You know, this sounds a little bit like two rich guys, powerful men, making a bet at the expense of some poor little guy, right? You might ask, why does God do that? Well, it goes back to this question of, are we significant? Do our decisions make a difference? And that's part of the lesson of the whole book of Job. What we do in response to the suffering is important to God. It's important to the universe. Really, he's saying, here's Yancey's view, but you can read that on your own. God is unworthy of love in himself. He just, people are bribed because they got a good life. Do you serve God because you have a good life? Virtually everybody in here, compared to the world's standards, has a very good life. Do we serve God because he blesses us? That's a good question. Do men love God for who he is, or do they use him for what they can get? Is God the vending machine in the sky? That's a big question. What is the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel about? Anybody listen to any of that on TV? What's it all about? If you have enough faith.
you have enough faith, you can be rich and prosperous in everything you do.
What does God want for you?
Rich and prosperous.
Rich, prosperous, and healthy. Teach.
Well, if you look at Deuteronomy 28, he promises health and wealth, and if you obey him. And then he has a whole list of things that are going to happen if you don't obey him.
So if you obey, as long as you obey him, you will be healthy, wealthy, and prosperous. Well,
Sometimes, yeah.
sometimes, exactly. It's like that old proverb, train up a child the way he should go, when he is old, he will not depart from it. That is a proverb that is not a promise. Okay? And it is true. I mean, we have in our modern American church a great deal of therapy preaching. Come to Jesus, he'll fix your marriage. Come to Jesus, he'll make your business prosper. Come to Jesus, he will make your mental health well, yada, 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 yada. You know them all, right? Now, are those things false? Well, not in general. Yeah, it's true. If you are a believing Christian and your wife is a believing Christian and you pray together and you go to church regularly and you read the Bible, they tell us that you have a 1 in 39,000 chance of being divorced. So yeah, there is a certain aspect to which there's therapy in the Christian life. Is that what the gospel is about? No, not at all. Not at all. And the problem I think that we have in therapy preaching is that we come to Christ because of what we can get from him. And that's not really why we should come to Christ. We should come to Christ because what he has done for us. You know that my eternal King song, my God, I love thee, not because I don't have it in my head, but it's beautiful. I was supposed to put it in here and I didn't, but not because I can gain heaven thereby or avoid hell, but because, oh Christ, you have done these things for me. You are my God and my eternal King. We love God because he first loved us. One of the verses you'll learn as a child. Alvin.
Very interesting that the call of Saul is said, go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and sons of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. That's an interesting call.
The call to supper, right?
That's right.
Paul says in Timothy, he says, all that will live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer some form of persecution, some form of trials, right? And that's to be expected. Now Satan's challenge is, he's the behaviorist. You're all like Pavlov's dogs. You come to God because God will fix you. He can give you good things. And that's his condemnation of all men. Now, is that true about all men? Well, certainly not. We know it's not true about Job, and that's the point of this book. But is it true about some men? Yes, it is. Jesus gave us the parable of the sower. And what is the seed sown on rocky soil supposed to represent? Those who are enthusiastic respondents to the gospel, right? But who later on, when persecution and trial arise, they fall away. There are people who serve God because of what they can get. But there are some who love him for himself. Job is such a man. This is not an old question. This is a very, very modern question. Do men come to church to make business contacts? Of course they do. Does a man treat me well because I can help him? If you're rich, every interaction you have with somebody is tainted by the fact that he may have an angle. How do you know, right? The beautiful young girl. I see, I swim for exercise every day, and I'm at the pool, and there are all these young and beautiful people. And there are young, beautiful girls. And when I see them, I think, first of all, I think they're very beautiful. But secondly, I think, how is she going to find someone who will adhere to her, not because she's beautiful, not because she's pretty, not because she's sexy, but because of her identity as a person? How does she know? I wonder this about my own granddaughters. We as parents and grandparents, we want to jump in there. We want to say, not you, and not you. I mean, we're looking for the kind of guy. I think I said last week, I'm in the market for husbands. We're looking for righteous and godly men. Why? Because they're guaranteed to do the right. Now, there's a high likelihood that that person will be faithful to my daughter or my granddaughter. And the question is, how do you resolve the question? Do you love me? Tevye gave us that in the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Remember that? He sings a wonderful song. Shall I sing it for you? No. Do you love me? And Golda says, do I love you? For 25 years, I've washed your clothes, I've cooked your food, mend your... I know. For 25 years, my bed is his. If that's not love, what is? She says. There's so much in that. Some of you, who is it? Don, was it Don? Had 62 years?
62.
62 years. You have managed it. And through that 62 years and the trials and tribulations and the joys and the sorrows of those years, that's how you know that you love that person, because of their personhood. Because they are a person. Takes a long time. I have been driving Miss Daisy for over 52 years. We've been married for 52 years, but we were buddies before that, so I've driven her for somewhere. I understand. Now she has a problem with my driving, right? She sees a red light. Somebody touches their brake light about a half mile out ahead. She says, "What? Stop the car!" And I said to her a couple weeks ago, I said, "Honey, I have been driving you around for 52 years. When are you going to learn to trust? And no accidents. You're safe wherever we got to go. When are you going to learn to trust my driving?" She says, "Not yet." So sometimes it takes a lot more time to know that you are loved, or sometimes not a lot of time, but a lot of trial. And that is what Job is going to go through. He's about to be tested, and he will prove by his example that Satan is not right about all men. He's at least wrong about Job. And by God's grace, he can be wrong about you and me. So Job is now going to be tested. He's going to be tested in 3 phases. Let's read Job 1:13-19.
One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the older brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you."
Let's pause for a second. The Sabaeans, they come from southern Arabia. This is the area we now know as Yemen, okay? And that's where the Queen of Sheba came, all the way up to see Solomon in Jerusalem. So these raiding parties came up from the Arab raiding parties, and they came up to the land of Uz. Okay, next.
While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you."
Okay, the break again. That's Chaldea. It's what became the Babylonian Empire, the early Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi. You may have read about him. And their raiding parties would have come across the Arabian desert, which in those days was probably not as hot and impassable as it is today. And so they came from there and they nailed him. Okay, go ahead.
While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them. They're all dead, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you."
Notice that 2 of the testing trials are acts of men. The Sabaeans and the Chaldeans raided. That this is evil that men do. But 2 would be classified by your insurance company as acts of God. Fire from heaven, maybe a volcano, who knows? And a hurricane or a tornado that knocked down all the house. And so as such, they represent those 2 types of evil, natural evil and moral evil, that covers the gamut of all the evils that put us through suffering. It's always going to be one thing or another. We're either going to get sick, and suffer, or we're going to go through Hurricane Ian and our house be lost, or we're going to be destroyed by some vandal or robber, or who knows. There's both moral and natural evil. Now, Job, in one day, has lost all his possessions and his family, except for his wife. Why do you think that? And I don't know, mumble. Why do you think?
You have more kids. She can have more kids. There you go. That's a very good point.
She might be one of his trials.
Might be.
Might be. I think Satan left her because he figured, we can use her to make him discouraged. And that sort of is what happened. Now, Job's response to the first phase is quite right. He is a godly man. He's an upright man. This is a strong and a good man. So here's what he says, verses 20 to 22.
At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing.
He did the right thing. He's a good man. He knows how to respond. He trusts that God is just. He knows that God has the right to take the gifts that he has given. And that's something we need to remember. All the blessings and the gifts that God has given to us are his to give and his to take. And that includes life, by the way. God gives life, he takes life. Now, Job has helped many people through grief. You read chapter 29, it talks about all the good deeds that he's done. He was very, very kind to people, and he helped a lot of people through grief. He knew how to deal with grief. And of course, he's a businessman. He's got flocks and herds far and wide. He's a politician. He's known all over the Near East. He knew how to deal with little reversals, big and small, and he could handle all that. And he knows how to recover, to rebuild. And I imagine at this point, he handles the situation with resignation, with dignity, and purposeful action. You got 10 funerals we have to take care of. I have a lot of political things I need to deal with. My financial issues have to be dealt with. I've got to figure out, to make my insurance claims and all that stuff. And I'm sure that he received a lot of thoughts and prayers and cards from people who understood he's gone through a real rough time. But that wasn't the end of it. That's phase one. Now God lays on him another layer of pressure. And this time it gets a whole lot more personal. Job 2, 4-8.
Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well, then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes.
Ooh, now it's getting really rough, right? And on top of that, now his wife, who has been saved from death here, she says to him in verse 9, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die, or better translated, renounce God and die. Stop this business of trusting God and being such a pious man. That really must have hurt. And then he says to her in verse 10, very interesting, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Now, I think we give Job's wife a bad rap. Think about what she's lost. She's lost all of her children. She's lost all the wealth and status that she had in this life. She's got a husband who is detestably sick. And things are starting to really fall apart. I don't blame her for having a bout of self-pity and having lost her faith for a moment or two. But Job's rebuke tells us something. He's saying to her, not, you wicked, evil person, you're tormenting me. No, he says, you are better than this. Kind of reminds me, I have a little buddy of mine, a 4-year-old who lives across the street, and he's my buddy. I'm Mr. Bart to him. And I came back from Israel, and I was building a kit that I got of the boat that was on Galilee. Okay, it's a really nice little boat. It's 16-inch, it's model. And so Carol Ann says, Soren, do you want to go down and see Mr. Bart build his boat? And Soren says, yeah, sure. But he comes down there and he looks at it, and all of a sudden he's got this look of disappointment. He says, that's so small. Mr. Bart, you can do better than this. It's kind of the spirit in which this statement is being made. Job says, you're talking like a foolish woman. That's not you. And you'll see that she sticks it out. And I think she comes back, and I think she's the mother of all the children at the end. So right now, we think we're several months into Job's trial. Chapter 29, verse 1, he talks about, I think about the months gone by when my life was so much better and cream, was in my life and so on. So now he's really beginning to wear down. I want to read a few passages with you. We're going to be in Job 19 and 20, or 30, if you want to read with us. Job 19, 13 to 17. And by the way, this is only a sample. There's so much more.
He has alienated my brothers from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My kinsmen have gone away. My friends have forgotten me. My guests and my maidservants count me a stranger. They look upon me as an alien. I summon my servant, but he does not answer, though I beg him with my own mouth. My breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my brothers.
Notice his friends and his family have all gone. Maybe the one, every rich and powerful man or woman, they generally have a retinue, right? There's always the friends and family who show up, and they're living in the villa. So they're gone. But his servants, and he must have had a load of them, don't respond to him anymore. They just don't want to be around him. I mean, he says, my breath is loathsome to my wife. Now, can I point out? She's still there. We're well into this thing now, and she's stuck by him. So I have a little more admiration for that woman than we give when we off the cuff say she's there to torment him. I think she's hung in there. God bless her for doing so. But he has become loathsome. And now what happens? Job 30, verse 1, and then 9 to 11.
But now they mock me, men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. And then verses 9 through 11. And now their sons mock me in song. I have become a byword among them. They detest me and keep their distance. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. Now that God has unstrung my bow and afflicted me, they throw off restraint in my presence.
I like that. Now that God has unstrung my bow, I don't have any power anymore. I lost my dignity. And men the sons of men whom I would not have put with my dogs now come at me. All his enemies now, and every powerful man has enemies, right? They come out of the woodwork. And they are going to pick the bones, and they're going to mock him, and he is under attack. And then Job 30, 15 and 17 to 17.
Terrors overwhelm me. My dignity is driven away as by the wind. My safety vanishes like a cloud. And now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest.
His dignity is gone. He's racked by fears for his safety. He's got pain and suffering that keep him awake at night. Job 19, verses 20 to 21.
I'm nothing but skin and bones. I have escaped with only the skin of my teeth. Have pity on me, my friends, have pity, for the hand of God has struck me.
He's lost a lot of weight, right? He's reduced. It's very poignant, that last verse. He is now begging for pity. He says, please, give me some pity. He's been broken. And there comes a time when God breaks us. Bunyan talks about it in his book, Pilgrim's Progress. He talks about the valley of humiliation. It's not the valley of humility. It's the valley of humiliation, where we are humiliated. And we begin to recognize what really is important when everything else is stripped away. Canon Rawlinson, in a commentary, says this. He says his strength was impaired, his nerves were unstrung, his mind was depressed, and when no longer permitted to enter the dwellings of men, he sat himself down upon the mezbele, or the ash heap, outside of his dwelling, an object of loathing and disgust to passers-by. He has been broken, and he's now just begging for pity. Well, that's phase 2. There is a phase 3, okay? And this phase is an interesting phase because it involves his friends. And it involves casting doubt upon God, upon it's ideas and words that tear at his faith and trust in God. The things he thought were true don't seem to be true anymore. And these friends of his gang up on him and challenge him. And the interesting thing that makes it hard is that he and his friends agree about the major questions of who God is and what he is like. What they don't agree on is who Job is and what Job is like. And so they are pouring into him long knives of self-doubt and doubting his own faith. Now, I think you'll notice one thing about this. Satan had to ask permission of God to take his riches and to take his children. He had to ask permission a second time of God to take his health, right? He didn't have to ask permission for this phase. Now, we'll see next week that there's actually a satanic involvement, but it is not to do with asking God. Satan did not have to ask God for permission to speak to Eve. And really, we're acting out the same question that was being posed in the Garden of Eden. Will men choose for me or against me? These guys are coming, and Satan is far more cunning at this point, and he's going to put him through much, much deeper testing. And that's why the book is so long. And we'll go through a lot of the arguments and the things and the way this all came about. But they're going to make him ask questions like, is God is good? Is God good? Is God good? Does he hate me? He asked that question. Have I sinned unawares? Is there something in me that's wrong? Now, it may have taken these three friends weeks and months, maybe part of the months. It took a while for the news to get to them. We'll talk about where they come from later. It may have taken them a while to make the preparations for the journey and then to make the journey. But I want to say this about those three friends because we get really hard on them. Okay. They did the right things for a grieving friend. Things we can learn from. First of all, they show up. They show up. You know, I'm afraid I'm very much a misanthrope in some ways. And when there's trouble, I just don't want to get involved. I don't want to go there. I have to push myself to do that. These guys came from a long ways away at great expense in time and money to simply be with him. We would be wise to remember that. Second thing, they wept and they shared his grief. Let's read 11 to 13 in chapter 2.
When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was.
Not only did they show up, but they wept and shared his grief. There are some people who have that gift. I had an aunt, my favorite aunt, who had that ability to rejoice with those who rejoice and to weep with those that weep. That's a gift. If you've got it, boy, it's a blessing that you can be to people who are going through suffering like this. They did. They identified with his suffering. They shared his grief. But then they simply sat with him. And a lot of times when you're going through troubles, that's all you need. You don't need a lot of advice. And so many times we want to come in, we want to read a Bible verse. We want to tell a person what they ought to do next. We ought to remind the person of all the truths that God is great and merciful and he'll take you through this. And shut up. Right? A lot of time, that's all you should do. Don't say a word. Just sit out of respect for the grief of that person. Jerry.
The ministry of presence. Wonderful. That's a very
Good one. And then they waited until Job was ready to speak. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 3, which is Job's lament. Job is the first one to speak. They wait until he wants to talk. And then they begin talking to him. Now, God knows the outcome. This is not a wager that he wonders how's it going to happen, how's it going to come out. You know, God exists outside of time, and there's just really no way we can understand all that. But the point is that neither Satan nor the angels nor the human beings, you and me, do that in any of these situations. We don't know the backstory. So God's given us an example here of a story of man going into suffering and trial and testing and how he responds to it. What's the first question that we ask when we go into suffering?
Why?
Why? God, why have you? Boy, did I ask that question. I screamed that question. Why did you do this to me? We want to know. And then we ask, how could you, a good God, do this bad thing to me? And what are we saying? God's not good. We begin to impugn his character. Do you even know? We impugn his knowledge. Do you care? We impugn his love. Those are the questions we ask because we don't know the backstory. But here we do. The question here is not the question of why is Job suffering? We already got the answer to that. That's chapters 1 and 2. We know why. So what's the question? The question is, will Job trust God? Philip Yancey wrote a great book that helped me a lot during that time. And it's called Disappointment with God. I highly recommend it. And he says here, the point of the book of Job is not suffering. Where is God when it hurts? The prologue, chapters 1 and 2, dealt with that issue. The point of the book of Job is faith. Where is Job when it hurts? Where are you and I when it hurts? The question is not so much, why do I suffer so? But will I continue to trust God? And Job's story gives us the example of his faith and his tenacity. Okay. And a reason to trust God when the lights go out. It is somehow really important to the heavens that men on earth trust God even when the lights go out. In fact, Revelation is full of these statements where it says, blessed is he that overcometh, or he that perseveres, for he shall receive a crown of life. The doctrine of the perseverance of the saints is simply this: the saints persevere. Those who truly love God persevere. And we'll see Job is an example of that perseverance that we need. That's the first thing we learned from the book of Job. And then we also learn as we get to the end and God speaks, there's reason to trust God. He doesn't answer the question, why are you suffering? He tells us the answer for Job, but not for us. But he tells us a reason to trust him when the trials come our way.